The first shot cracked the quiet like a whip, and Sheriff Kane was already moving, black duster flaring, boots chewing dust, as he threw his body across the boy and drove him behind the trough. A second round rang off the pump handle, showering both of them with splinters of gray wood and cold well water. The boy's small hand clamped Kane's coat with a desperate strength. His breath hitched like a snared rabbit. "Keep low," Kane said, voice flat, calm. The air stank of iron and wet rope. A third bullet punched a chalky chip from the waterstone and hummed off into the cottonwoods. Across the alley, the far boardwalk crouched under heat, windows blinking with sun glare. Somewhere behind those panes, a rifleman reloaded. The sheriff lifted his hat brim with 2 fingers, reading angles, the church bell tower shadow, the slight gleam along a window sash, the way the dust lifted in little sighs after each report. He counted heartbeats. The boy trembled against him, ribs fluttering like a frightened bird's. "Name?" Kane asked. "Noah," the boy whispered. Sir, I don't." "Hold fast, Noah. Ain't no cartridge, born today, got your name on it while I'm standin'." Kane's silver badge was a cold weight against the boy's temple. He palmed it back under the lapel, then slid the Colt free. Pearl grip, warm and familiar. He tasted lye soap and grit on his tongue. The shooter fired again, a sloppy rush shot. Kane leaned out, eyes narrowed. 4th window left, 2nd floor, an open cut in sunburned clapboard. He pictured the alley like a diagram in his skull. Trough, pump, stacked apple crates, the assessor's office stairs, the long shadow of the abandoned courthouse at the far end, its empty gallows frame like a finger pointing at God. He thumbed the hammer. This time, when he rose with his whole body aligned. Exhale bled to nothing. He fired once. Glass coughed. A man swore. A rifle clanged to floorboards. Kane was already moving, dragging the boy, sprinting bent along the shadow of the stable as a fresh pair of pistols exploded from the corner. 2 figures down the lane now, coming quick, faceless in the glare. The sheriff drove shoulder first through the assessor's door and slammed it behind them. Paper dust lifted from ledgers and floated like lazy snow. Noah's knees hit the plank floor. He was pale under his freckles, a rag of boy hardly 10. Kane crouched, stone-gray eyes close. "Any more with you?" The boy shook his head a fraction. They came for me. A man in a red scarf. He said Pa sent. Pa? Kane's jaw ticked. Heat pulsed at his temples. He let the word pass like a stray dog. Boots thundered past the door, shadows sliding over the frosted glass. "Sheriff," a voice crowed outside, oily with laughter. "Lay down that iron and send out the whelp. No harm'll touch your town if you mind your business." Kane breathed once, steady and slow. He slid the office window up with care, listened to the ugly hymn of insects in the noon, the ring of steel on a farrier's anvil, the quiet gasp of a woman behind the curtain across the street. He smelled horse and hot tar, and the thin tin scent of blood from the alley. His badge spun once in his fingers, a coin of law catching sun, then stilled. "Stay behind the desk," he told the boy. "Hands over your head, eyes down. Do as I say, and you live." "Sheriff," the boy's voice cracked, raw with terror and trust, all tangled. Kane gave him a look that folded the words flat. Then he slipped back into the alley, hugging wall, counting boards under his boots. The 2 pistol men had taken post behind a hay rack, leather creaking, spurs clinking soft as wind bells. Kane could see their elbows, the shuffle of impatience. He flattened the Colt against brick, drew a breath, and cut angle. He went clean and fast. 2 steps, 2 shots. The hay rack jumped. One man folded with a wet wheeze. The second staggered, firing wild at the sky as his hat spun into the street. Kane crossed the distance in 3 strides and wrenched the gun away, shoving the survivor face first into dust. "Who's the scarf?" Kane asked, knee on the man's shoulder. "Boss," the fellow choked. "Said bring the kid. Said the sheriff was soft for strays." Kane's mouth tightened. "Name. You know his name. Say it." The man's eyes flicked, small and gleaming with sudden mean courage. "You tell me, Lawman." Kane's patience ran through him like river gravel. He slammed the man's head once to quiet the hope of trouble, and left him gagging in the dust. The alley had gone too quiet. That meant more rifles or something worse. From somewhere up street, the bell rope thumped. Once, twice. The lazy alarm of a town that couldn't decide if it was in danger or simply bored of its own dread. Kane wiped his thumb along the Colt's cylinder, checking heat. His hands were steady. Only his breath had a ghost in it, a remembered rhythm of lifting a small boy with hair the color of winter straw, a boy whose hand fit exactly between his scar and collarbone. He tasted a phantom of tobacco on a colder wind. He shoved the memory down where he kept other necessary graves. He went back for Noah. Inside the assessor's, the boy had not moved, as ordered. His small fingers were laced behind his head. His jaw was clenched so hard the skin jumped. Kane set his palm to the boy's hair for just a second, an old habit he thought he'd killed. "Up," he said, and they moved. They cut across the alley, skirted the blacksmith's yard where hammered metal rang like angry bells, and ducked into the back of the jail. It was a square of brick, cool as a well, 2 cells with iron as honest as scripture. The smell there was limestone, old sweat and oil. Kane pushed Noah into the back cell, then locked it and pocketed the key. "This ain't to keep you in," he said. "It's to keep hell out." Noah swallowed. "Sheriff, why are they after me?" Kane studied the boy's face, the tilt of his cheekbones, the broken scab on his lip, and behind it the kind of fear that isn't learned but bred. He kept his voice even. "Because some men figure blood is theirs to spend." He slid cartridges into the Colt by feel. "Listen, if I fall, you stay quiet till Miss Hallie from the depot comes. She's meaner than she looks. She'll fetch the key from—" The jailhouse window busted in with a howl. A loop of flaming kerosene cloth arced through the bars and landed smoking on the plank floor. Kane kicked it back out with a curse, heat licking his boot leather. Another rock followed, wrapped in paper twine. He scooped it, unrolled the scrap. One word in a scrawl like barbed wire. "Boy." Something in him went very still. He walked to the desk, took the telegraph key in his big hand, tapped 2 messages, one to the post at Pine Gulch, one to Deputy Harlan, who owed him and generally meant it. Then he holstered slow and set his hat on his head like armor. Out in the street, men had gathered in knots. Kane stepped into the afternoon glare, a long dark mark on a white day. Dust curled around his boot heels. The abandoned courthouse stared down at him with blind windows and that gallows frame, the noose line coiled neat on its crossbar like a sleeping snake. He let that picture burn into him. The law was a structure, sometimes a warning, sometimes a trap. He faced the crowd. "Folks, go on home." His voice carried like a hammer falls. Shutters shut. Water at the ready. Anyone sees a red scarf, you spit and walk the other way. "'Tain't our fight," someone muttered. "It is if they fire your roof." Kane said, without looking. He turned, scanning edge to edge, the mill, the hotel, the telegraph office where the wire sang with little insect notes, the saloon doors breathing warm whiskey air. Go. They went, grumbling, because men love a spectacle until it points back at their own door. Kane stood alone in the heat, the whole town ringing like a railroad anvil. He wasn't afraid. He was tired. He pinched his badge between thumb and forefinger, and it spun once, twice, then stopped cold. The metal showed him a small, distorted reflection of a man he did not much like, and did not intend to quit being. He walked to the alley's mouth where the first shots had started, and looked up at the assessor's window. A blood smear there, a hat caught on a nail like a pinned moth. He measured the distance to the jail in his head, the lines of fire, the best perches for a rifle. He placed his body in those lines the way a carpenter sets lintels. He would be the wall. Behind him, a door creaked. Miss Halley's voice floated from the depot like a saw, cutting slow. "You making friends again, Sheriff?" He didn't answer. He was listening. The far hills, blue with heat, were talking. Not the wind, not birds, hooves. Several. No, many. A sound like distant rain on hardpan. Kane looked down at the scrap tied to the rock again. Boy. The handwriting tugged at something he'd locked up long ago. A flourish on the B, the cruel press of the wise tail. He felt his jaw set. The sound grew. A thrumming felt in the boards under his feet, in his teeth, in the string of the gallows rope overhead. Sun caught on metal far beyond town, a shimmer that might have been heat mirage, if not for the black drifts of dust rising like smoke behind it. Noah's thin voice reached him from the cell window, a thread twisting in the hot air. "Sheriff, I think I know that sound. My pa rides with a lot of men." A beat. He said he'd come for me. Kane looked toward the horizon, where a line of riders was lifting out of the heat, rank on rank, a red scarf bright as fresh blood out front. His hand found the Colt. His lips barely moved. Law ain't always justice. The rest hung unsaid, like the weight of a choice he could not yet make. Noah's breath hitched, too soft for anyone but Kane to truly hear. "Pa," the boy whispered, and the line of riders spilled down the ridge toward town. They came off the ridge the way a storm walks, broad and slow and certain, dust climbing in sheets behind them until the whole horizon looked like the belly of a thunderhead. The leader rode at the point, a red scarf burning at his throat like a coal. He sat his bay with a fighter's ease, reins in one hand, a spencer laid lazy across his thighs in the other. Sun made a coin of his buckle and threw hot light off the shaved edge of his jaw. He smiled when he saw Sheriff Kane standing alone in the middle of Maine, a long black mark on a white day. "Sheriff," he called, voice rough as rawhide, "you got something belongs to me." Behind the barred window of the jail, a small pair of fingers curled through iron. The boy's breath fogged the glass in an oval, and a single word fell out of him without air. "Pa." Kane didn't look back. He kept his boots set shoulder wide, Colt riding easy in the holster, badge tucked beneath the lapel where it felt the beat of his heart. The abandoned courthouse loomed to his right, all blind windows and the gallows frame above its porch. The noose rope lay coiled on the beam like a sleeping snake that might wake if a man spoke too loudly. "You brought guns into my street, mister," Kane said. "So let's start with your name." The red scarf man chuckled. "Name's Ezekiel Vance, and every mile of road between here and Dry Knife knows it. The boy's mine. You snatched him out from under honest family business." His eyes, a cold river color. slid to the jailhouse as if he could see through brick. Send him out. We'll finish our ride in peace. Honest family business. Kane's mouth made a shape that might have been a smile another year. Gunfire at the children ain't honest, nor family. Vance lifted one gloved hand, and his riders fanned in a crescent, horses blowing, leather creaking like old ships in a roll. On the boardwalks, curtains twitched. The blacksmith stood frozen with his hammer in midair, the anvil's ring still shivering between buildings. Miss Hallie at the depot set her jaw and reached under the counter for the thing she kept there that had once lowered two drunks in half a heartbeat. The town breathed shallow. Vance's gaze came back to Kane. "You killed two of mine in that alley," he said conversationally. "Blood calls for blood. I'll take the boy, and I'll take a life for each one you sent to dust. You choose the men. Makes no never mind to me. Not how law runs here." "Law," Vance drawled, and the word seemed to amuse him. "I got papers on that boy, Sheriff. His ma left him to me, notarized by a circuit preacher with a decent right cross." Kane didn't so much as blink. He had seen too many papers written after the fact, too many signatures scabbed onto lies. "You'll show them, in the courthouse, under the gallows, with my eyes on the ink. You come alone, one man with you, no more. You aiming to bury me in there?" Vance's teeth showed white as bone. "You got that hangman's itch, Kane? Seems a quiet table to talk over." He nodded to the bad-shaped sunspot wobbling on the courthouse door. "Bring your best argument. Leave your rifles with your boys." Vance tipped two fingers off the brim of a sweat-dark hat. "You're cute for an undertaker." He swung down and handed his Spencer to a scarred man on a roan. "Hoyt, keep the boys polite. Service ends when I say so." They walked the boards toward the courthouse like two men going to measure land, slow, straight, eyes forward. The street had gone so quiet, a man could feel the sun move. Inside the cool gloom, dust motes turned lazy in light, knifing through a cracked pane. The gallows beam above the porch gave a small, complaining creak, wood drying and shifting in the heat. Kane felt that noise in his teeth. At the doorway, Vance paused and smiled toward the jailhouse across the street. "Boy, your pa's here." A thin answer came back, paper cut, small. "I know." Kane held the door open. "After you." They faced each other in the empty courtroom, floorboards worn smooth by boots that had come pleading or lying to mercy long ago. The judge's bench stood like an altar fallen out of favor. Two pews leaned against a wall, half broken, half waiting. Vance moved like a man who had never thought a room could judge him. He pulled a folded page from his vest and flicked it with a finger. "Paper. You'll read it slow, maybe sound out the big words." He smiled. "Or you going to simply hand me what's mine? We shake hands like neighbors, and no roofs burn today." Kane didn't touch the page. He was watching Vance's hands, the slitten heel scars across his knuckles, the way he carried himself slightly to one side, as if sparing an old wound. Men wore their histories if you knew where to look. "Before we read, I'll ask the only question matters. Why does the boy look like fear made flesh when he hears your voice?" Vance's pleasant face lost its pleasantness by half. "Because he's a boy, and boys mind their betters when the belt sings. Ain't your business how a father makes a man." He stepped one pace closer, enough for Kane to smell whiskey and trail dust and old leather oil. "It ain't your right to make a thief of me in my own blood." "Your blood took shots at him," Kane said. He kept his voice flat, the way a man lays a solitaire card and does not blink. Your blood threw fire through a window and wrote boy on a rock like a brand. Vance's eyes cooled. You broke flesh on my crew. Blood for blood. Bring me the whelp, and bring me the man you choose to bury for my two. I'll take the blacksmith. Looks heavy enough to satisfy, but you can swap him for a drunk if you favor mercy. Kane saw the street through the window. Men shifting with eyes cut sideways. Whisper smoke rising from a cigar someone was too rattled to enjoy. The gallows rope dropping a single inch as heat worked its fibers. His palm rolled the badge once in his pocket. The metal spin steadied him. I won't pay blood tithes, he said, and I don't hand children to men who talk about belts like hymns. He tilted his head. Even if the law wrote you a paper. Vance laughed softly. Then you ain't a lawman. You're a preacher in a borrowed coat. He let the paper fall on the dusty bench and leaned in until his breath warmed Kane's cheek. Hear me? You got until sundown. Boy waits under that beam with a rope above him, not to hang, mind, just so you understand our conversation. If you set him free, I pick 3 throats, one at the depot, one at the smithy, and one picked by random between. I'll use your gallows because I admire a town that keeps its tools clean. Kane said nothing. Silence sits heavy when it's carved from choice. Outside, a fly worried the courthouse pane. Its little body made a sound like a watch refusing to die. Vance straightened and adjusted the red scarf at his throat with careful fingers. There was something ceremonial in it, the way a priest might alter a stole. He looked Kane over, like a buyer reading the legs and teeth on a horse. You got a ghost, Sheriff. I can hear him scraping his little boots in your head. His mouth made a shape better men use for pity. I knew a boy once. Hair like straw, eyes like a winter river. Lost him in a fire started by men wore badges. Puts a sickness in you. Makes you think the world owes you a soul. He shrugged, and the tenderness died. Give me mine, and I'll leave yours. Kane's face didn't change, but the old scar along his jaw prickled as if wind worried it. He saw for a blink the shape of a small boot blackened to coal, the way grief burns slow when it has no air. Then he locked it back where he kept it and spoke as if reciting weather. You'll get your answer at sundown. Then we'll ready the rope, Vance said. A man ought to see what time looks like. They walked back into the white glare together. The town exhaled like it had been under a barrel. Vance put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled sharp. His riders sat up straight as plate rails. Hoyt, bring the post. We'll dress the gallows proper. Men peeled off with coils of new hemp and a sawn cedar upright they'd hauled like a trophy. They moved with the neat efficiency of men who'd built gallows before. Someone tossed the coil up. It kissed the beam, fell true, and a man caught the bitter end and hauled. The rope sang through wood. The loop dropped, clean and pale. A little girl cried once and was yanked back from the window by a quick hand. On the jailhouse step, Deputy Sutter had appeared, hat shoved back, mouth working like he wanted to help the sheriff speak. He was young, soft around the eyes, the kind who made a show of polish on his star. He leaned close as Kane stepped up. We could give the boy, he whispered, voice tight. Just for the night. Calm 'em some. Under watch. Buy time. Kane smelled nervous sweat under the deputy's bay rum. He saw, over Sutter's shoulder, one of Vance's riders, thin, fox-faced, make a small gesture with 2 fingers across his own throat and grin. Sutter flinched like the signal had touched his skin. The sheriff filed the moment away in the quiet place where he kept the ledger of men. You go water the horses, Kane said evenly, then put buckets at every threshold. Tell Miss Hallie her telegraph works fast when she's scared. Sutter's eyes flicked, guilty in a way a boy's are guilty when they've told a secret and can't swallow it back. He nodded too quickly and loped off, boots slippery on the dust. Vance's men finished their work. The noose hung at easy height, yellow and neat. Vance strolled beneath it and patted the loop like a man proud of a new gate hinge. "Sundown," he said. "The boy walks out with you and kisses this rope with his shadow, so I know you understand the conversation. Else, we pull." Kane felt every eye in town pressing into his back, like coins into wet clay. He heard Noah's voice again from the cell window, small and split. "Sheriff, don't let him." The sheriff lifted his head and spoke not to Vance, not to the crowd, but to the hot, bright air that hears oaths. "Law ain't always justice," he said, steel-gray eyes cutting sunlight, "but justice rides with me." Vance's smile flattened. He flicked his scarf back from his throat like a matador teasing a bull. "Then ride careful," he said. The sun slid a little lower. The rope creaked, and the shadow of the noose fell across the jailhouse door like a brand. Morning light struck the gallows like a blade, throwing a black rectangle over half the square. Dust hung in that shadow, slow and glittering, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Sheriff Kane stood beneath the eaves of the jailhouse, silver badge cold against his duster, palm heavy on the key hooked to his belt. Inside, the child he'd pulled from last night's gunfire. Small boots, torn sleeve, eyes fever bright, slept curled on a cot with a blanket up to his chin. The boy's name was Owen. He whispered in dreams, one word over and over like a prayer he both loved and feared. Pa. By noon the street was a low boil. Shopkeepers, ranch hands, miners caked in the gray of the hills, half a county pressing toward the courthouse door till it creaked on its hinges. They wanted answers. They wanted safety. Some wanted the boy gone. A lanky freighter spat dust and spoke first. "Ain't no law gonna feed my kids when the bandits torch our wagons, Kane." Murmurs rose. A woman from the boarding house dabbed at her neck with a lace scrap. "If his father wants him, give him back. Blood's blood." Kane's eyes were winter steel. "Blood ain't a license." His voice came quiet, but carried. "The man who claims the boy rode in with torches last night and left 2 bodies cooling in the street. He'll not collect flesh from my jail like it's a counter at the butcher's." A cough scraped at the far end of the room. Mayor Ellsworth, waistcoat strained, watch chain bright as a nugget, lifted a document with the importance people give to paper when they're becoming cowards. "I have here a writ from Circuit Judge Pike. It names Jeremiah Vale as the boy's father and orders immediate return of custody." The name moved across the room like wind through wheat. Jeremiah Vale, killer, mule skinner, sometime preacher when whiskey made him gentle, other times worse than any devil. He'd ridden at dawn with 14 hard men and a promise sung through their gun barrels, hand over the child by sundown, or red sky would live up to its name. Kane took the paper, thumb finding the seal. Wax was right color. Looping hand had the flourish, but the stamp impression bled at the edge where it should have been clean. The sheriff turned it to the light. "This seal's from 3 circuits ago," he said. "Pike changed it after Christmas when he sobered up." A ripple. Ellsworth colored. A few men looked at their boots like they'd been caught praying to a fake cross. "Forgery or not," the mayor blustered, "I won't see our town burned to ash over one child who ain't ours." Kane set the paper down. It slid across the table and struck against the wooden ballot box used for town elections. The box rocked, thumped once, and settled. His badge, spun slowly between finger and thumb, bright, then dark, then bright. "Law ain't always justice," he said, each word measured as a step on a narrow ledge. "But justice rides with me." The telegraph clicked from its corner like a nervous animal. The operator, a boy with ink on his cuffs, peeked out. "Message from Black Elk Station, Sheriff. From Pike's clerk." Kane read. The clerk denied the writ, denied ever seeing Jeremiah Vale in his courtroom, denied the seal. The room's heat changed. It sharpened, like the minute before a storm when the wind turns and the scent of rain comes pewter cold on your tongue. "Then we've no paper," Ellsworth said tightly. "Only fire at our doorstep." Kane nodded, seeing true for the first time what the day would be. He looked past faces to the door and the square beyond, to the gallows throwing its long shadow like a warning finger. "We'll meet here at 3. You want to vote to hand a boy to an outlaw? You do it with your names on a ledger under the Lord's eye and the county clerk's. But until that vote, Owen stays where bars say he does." He left to the street in a chorus of voices that were not agreement and not quite revolt, something knotted between. Heat poured down. Horses swished tails at flies. A black dog watched from under a freight wagon, tongue lolling. Kane sidled his Colt in its holster, like a man checking the weight of his own heart, and crossed back into the jail. Deputy Ned Calder was at the desk, boots up, hat tipped, to shade his eyes from the barred light. He smelled of tobacco and rain that hadn't fallen. There were men who felt like empty rooms when you walked past them. Calder was a room with a door ajar, just enough to show nothing. Towns rattled. He drawled. "You sure you want your name hanging on this?" "My name's hung on worse," Kane said. He moved to the cell. Owen had woken, pale and stubborn as a seedling in wind. The boy's gaze clung to the sheriff like a burr. "He'll come, won't he?" he asked. "My pa, he always comes." Kane's scar tugged at his neck when he swallowed. A smaller voice answered in his head, the voice of another little boy, his own, swallowed by the years but never gone. "Sometimes fathers come," Kane said. "Sometimes they shouldn't." He brought the child a tin cup of water. The boy's hands were chapped, nails black with soot and powder from last night's stampede through gun smoke. When their fingers touched the tin, the cup trembled. Not the boy's. Kane set it steady. "We'll keep you breathing," he said, and shut the cell. The square became a threshing floor at 3. Inside the courthouse, the ledger lay open like a Bible. Men signed. Women whispered. The air pressed in thick with sweat and powder ghosts. A miner with a blue bandana tied over one ear turned, shoulders bunching. "Sheriff," he called, "you gonna keep us safe when the sun drops?" There was a challenge in it, and a plea beneath. Kane didn't look away. "I'll keep what's mine," he said, "and the weak are mine until I drop." Ellsworth huffed and made a show of signing first. "One boy is not worth 14 rifles," he announced, so loudly that even those in the back felt singled out for agreement. Enough hands followed him to make the ledger's page black with ink strokes. Then Sally Finch, who ran the school, stepped forward with chalk dust still smudged on one wrist. "There's more than 14 rifles out there," she said, chin set. "There's what we teach our young when they're old enough to read that ledger. I won't have them learn we sold a child to wolves because wolves howled." A farm wife signed under her name with a hand that shook. The smith put down his XO with a hammer's certainty. Razor-thin margins grew and shrank with each stroke. The bell in the church tower tolled 4 before the count was finished. The sound rolled through town like a knuckle on a table. Ellsworth snatched the ledger. His lips moved. He counted again and again, as if arithmetic could be bullied. When he finally raised his eyes, there were 2 towns in his face, one that sighed with relief and one that wanted him dead. Tied, he croaked. Dead even. Thunder rumbled from far off, though the sky was a bright, pitiless blue. It took Kane a second to understand it was horses. He stepped to the doorway, and the world stepped with him. Jeremiah Vale's riders came like a dust devil with knives. Torches flamed in their hands, though the hour didn't need them. There was a showman's cruelty in it, light against heat, fire at the edge of day to promise what night would be. Vale rode at the point, beard split by a scar that cleaved his lip into a half-sneer whether he smiled or not. He carried a pretense of a preacher's collar, gray and wilted, as if he believed the sky might be fooled at gunpoint. His voice rang across the square. "Sheriff, I got no quarrel with your townsfolk. I want only what's mine." Kane walked to the foot of the gallows steps and stood in its shadow on purpose. He let the silence grow teeth. "You want a boy to grow into what you are," he said. "Not while I carry this badge." Vale laughed, big as a barn door banging. "Badge? I've worn 3. Railroad, mining, and one from a circuit nobody remembers. Paper's just ink till a man with iron makes it sing." He lifted a hand, and 2 riders peeled left and right, slow, smug, the kind of move meant to make a sheriff decide if his hands were enough. Behind Kane, a whisper of leather, a hinge sighing. He didn't turn. Deputy Calder's shadow had vanished from the jailhouse window. The hair along Kane's forearms rose like wheat in a sudden breeze. An old rider swung a canvas satchel and let it thump at the mayor's feet. "Ledger's yours," Vale called. "Pick the side that lives." Ellsworth bent, fingers fumbling the buckle. Inside lay a neat stack of folded currency, a bright brass watch, and a tiny blood-streaked shoe. It was a child's, scuffed at the toe. A sound came from the jail then. A delicate high whistle. 2 notes, the kind a man makes to a colt. Owen's head snapped up behind bars. "Pa," he breathed. The boy moved faster than fear, hands through steel, reaching as if the bars might forget themselves. The rear door of the cell block eased wide with the slow grace of a liar's smile. Kane spun for the key. His belt hook was empty. He was moving before his mind put words to betrayal. Boots thudding the plank floor, breath tight, colt rising. The corridor smelled of iron and old sweat, of oil, and, sharp and wrong, of sulfur match heads. A sulfur scratch hissed in the dark, like a snake clearing its throat. "Lawman?" Calder's voice came from the far end, soft, apologetic as a stolen prayer. "We can't fight 14 and live." Another sound layered under his words, the low whoomp of tar being lit. Heat breathed in the hallway. From the square, a woman screamed. From the cell, a child's fingers scrabbled at steel. Kane stepped into the doorway and saw the back door yawning to the alley, orange light licking the jamb. Between him and the open night stood his deputy with a torch in one hand and the missing key in the other, and beyond Calder, framed by the alley's cut of sky, Jeremiah Vale tipped his hat and smiled like a man receiving a bride. Kane's badge turned once in his palm, bright, then dark. He drew, and from the square came the crack of a rifle. A pane of the jailhouse window burst inward in a glitter of shards, and a bullet streaked past Kane's ear to bury itself in the doorframe, inches from Owen's face. The boy screamed. Fire took its first biting breath. Everything tilted toward ruin. The torch's breath licked the jam, orange light crawling up old pine, like a bad idea learning to walk. Deputy Calder stood in the back doorway with the missing key pinched between thumb and forefinger, the flame in his other hand painting his face. The color of guilt. "Lawmen," he said softly, as if he were apologizing to a grave. 14 guns says this ain't our hill." A rifle cracked from the square. Glass burst inward in a glitter of bright needles. The shot chewed a groove in the doorframe, inches from the child's cheek. Owen. He had whispered that name through the bars, though last night, panicked, he'd called himself Noah, threw both hands over his head, and made a noise no one should ever hear from a child. Kane's Colt came up by itself, the way a man's hand reaches when the stove lid slips. He had a wrist to break, a key to drop, a torch to kill, a boy to keep breathing. There was no arrangement of those truths that fit inside the law. "Put it down, Ned," Kane said, voice flat enough to skate a coin on. "Key and fire." Calder swallowed. "I'll go to hell for this. You already bought your ticket." Calder's jaw tightened. His voice thinned. "I can't watch a town burn over one boy." "Then don't watch." Kane fired. The bullet took the torch at the throat. It spun from Calder's grip in a red arc and went out against the wet stone like a snuffed sermon. Calder flinched, hand jerking just enough, and the iron key hopped from his fingers, bit the plank, and skittered toward the darkness under the cot. Kane was moving before the sound finished. He hit Calder shoulder first, slammed him to the jam hard enough to make the old door moan, and pinned him there with one arm, while his other hand dug for the key. Calder twisted, breath hot with fear and sour bay rum. "Don't do this," he hissed. "We can hand the boy over, Sheriff. For now. There's a paper." "There's forgery," Kane said. He wrenched the deputy around, felt something in the man's arm pop like a bad knuckle. "And there's a father dressing like a preacher who rides with a noose already tied." Calder sagged. "He ain't the worst thing rides these roads." "Maybe not." Kane hit him once. Calder slid down the jam to sit among the splinters, eyes starry, mouth open like a man trying to catch rain. Kane's knuckles felt the way a bell sounds. "Sheriff," Miss Halley's voice cut through the din from the depot door, clean as a saw. "They're fanning across the roofs. If you've got a plan, now's when it starts." Kane's fingers found the key, cold and mean, and in the same motion he was at the cell, iron grinding, bolt jumping back with a heavy clack. He hauled the door wide, scooped the boy with one arm, light as a feed sack and shaking twice as much, and shouldered into the corridor. Smoke had already found the rafters. It wrote its name along the ceiling. The square roared, hooves, men shouting like carnival barkers, the thin eager crackle of dry thatch catching. Kane broke into the daylight with Owen clasped against his ribs, felt the heat shove him like an angry drunk, and ran straight for the thing that made law visible. The gallows threw its long black shadow like a blade. Veil. He wore a preacher's collar wilted by sweat, and the red scarf Kane had seen at his throat last night. Stood beneath the beam as if he'd been born there. Men who lived long on the wrong side of a badge learned to wear more than one name, and Jeremiah Vale had worn at least two. The writ said Vale. The street last night had heard him call himself Ezekiel Vance. Either way, the cruelty in him didn't change with the ink. He saw the boy in Kane's arms and smiled, lip cleaved by that white scar. So, the prodigal. Kane didn't slow. He hit the gallows steps at a run, took them 2, 3, the boards drumming under his boots, and the town held its breath, because men don't put children on a scaffold in the daylight unless the day has already chosen sides. He set Owen behind the upright post, where the beam's bulk made a narrow strip of shade, and turned. "Folks," he said, voice carrying clean to the hotel balcony, "get your buckets. Wet those roofs. Anything burns after this, you blame me direct." "Sheriff," the mayor bleated, color gone from his cheeks. Kane drew his knife. The gallows rope hung pale and coiled at the noose like a sleeping snake. He reached up, snagged the line, and drew it taut. Leather creaked. Hemp whispered. For a second, he felt every trial he'd ever signed, every neck he'd ever guarded at the drop. He thought of the paper Ellsworth had thrust at him, of a seal gone stale, of a clerk's wire that smelled of truth like rain. He thought of the room inside him, where he kept a little pair of boots no longer walking. He cut. The hemp parted with a pop and fell in a lazy spiral. The loop hit the platform in a soft slap and bounced once against his boot like a dead thing with the memory of motion. For a heartbeat, the world was nothing but sound. The hiss of 100 people inhaling at once, the dry rattle of a kerosene-soaked rag somewhere up street, finding flame, the wet clop of a horse stamping in place because it had not been asked to run yet. Vale's smile finished dying. He took one step onto the bottom stair, preacher collar grimed, red scarf bright as a wound. "You cut the law," he said, almost tender. "Saves me the trouble." Kane set his badge against the post and pressed until the steel bit wood. "Law ain't always justice," he said, low to the wood, the sky, and whatever listened between, "but justice rides with me." He turned to Owen. The boy's eyes were huge, his breath small and fast as a quail's. "Listen," Kane said, every word a nail. "I'm going to make men look at me, not you. When I move, you go down the back side, through the livery, into the alley by Miss Hallie's. She'll be there. She'll take you to the root cellar under the assessors." He broke off, thought of apple crates, thought of the blood smear on the window last night, thought of ambush. He adjusted on the fly, the way a man does when the board gives under his weight. "No, you go to the church crawl space. North side, where the wind stays cool. Hide till I come." Owen's lip worked. "He'll follow. Then we teach him something about following." Kane squeezed the small shoulder once. "Quick, shameful, necessary. You keep your head down, Owen. You gave me one lie, Noah, to stay alive. Now give me one truth to do the same. What is he to you?" The boy swallowed. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He looked down at his boots. "He ain't my pa. He's the man who took me when my pa didn't come back." Kane's scar prickled, as if the world had whispered under his collar. "Where's your ma?" "Dead." "Who told you to lie?" "Woman at the mission. Said if men came asking, say Noah, not Owen." He reached into his ragged shirt and pulled out a scrap of cloth, blue faded to gray, stamped with an eagle, and letters rubbed almost to ghosts, Fort C.N. Said give this to a sheriff. Fort Klein, or Crane, or Canyon, old army letters. A shape was walking toward revelation somewhere beyond this square, but there was no time to let it arrive. "Go," Kane said. He turned and stepped to the edge of the platform. The sun came at him like a hammer. Jeremiah Vale, Ezekiel Vance, lifted his palm, and his men fanned toward the flanks, lit torches bobbing like wicked fruit over a dark orchard. "Deliver," Vale called, "or we light your lesson." "Light it," Kane said, "because sometimes you don't bargain with a wolf. You teach the flock to kick." He fired once into the air, not warning, announcement. The report cracked the square in half. and shook the dust from window sashes. Heads turned, eyes came, and in that instant, Owen dropped off the back of the platform and ran low for the church. Miss Hallie was already at the corner, hair pinned like she meant to fight a flood. She had a coach gun she shouldn't have had, and a jaw that said she'd taken worse from better men. She caught the boy's sleeve and folded him into shadow without a sound. A shout went up from the riders on the livery roof. Powder sparked. The first lick of real fire rolled along shingles and took breath like a thief. The smith's boy dashed with a sloshing bucket. A rider winged him with a mean shot that left a line of red on his shoulder. Sally Finch hauled the boy by his belt and kept moving, chalk dust floating off her sleeve like a tiny snow. "Mayor," Kane barked without looking, "open your ledger again. Write the names of those who carry water, and we'll see who belongs to this town when the sun goes down." Ellsworth didn't move. His eyes were on the canvas satchel of money, on the tiny shoe that had fallen half out of it, leather scuffed and streaked with old blood. He made a soft sound, as if a word had started in him and decided it preferred to die. Vale put his boot on the first stair. "Last chance." "Ain't your last either," Kane said. "You get no more chances here." Vale's hand dropped to the pistol at his hip. Kane's badge spun on the post, catching noon like a bright fish in a dark river. From the church eaves, a bell rope moved, all on its own, like a finger testing the old knots. The first toll fell heavy into the heat. Once, twice, a third time. Deeper, as if the tower itself had chosen a side. Owen was halfway to the crawl space when a man stepped from between two wagons with a knife bright as a sermon. His hat was tipped low. His boots were quiet. Deputy Sutter, polished star, eyes soft as a calf's, raised the blade and smiled in a way that didn't belong on a boy. "Easy now," Sutter whispered. "Boss wants the whelp kindly." Kane saw it, the flash of steel, the small body stopping, and the whole square narrowed to the space between one heartbeat and the next. He stepped off the scaffold into the air, gun already turning, sight already drinking Sutter's shoulder, and the bell's fourth toll started to fall. Kane hit the ground, already firing. The Colt's bark clipped Deputy Sutter high in the shoulder. The knife spun from the boy deputy's hand, clattering across packed dust and ringing once like a small bell. Owen flinched and folded. Miss Hallie's arm shot out from the depot corner and clubbed the boy into her shadow, skirts brushing his cheek like a curtain falling. The church bell tolled again, heavy iron breathing in the heat, while gunfire stitched the eaves and shingles took flame with a greedy crackle. Sutter staggered, teeth bared, one hand pressed to the sudden wet on his sleeve. "Hold your fire," he shouted toward the riders. "I got him." Kane was already there, a fast, dark shape through smoke. He kicked the knife aside, planted a boot on it, and jammed Sutter back into the alley wall. Up close, the boy's breath stank of fear and bay rum. The polished star on his vest had a nick on the edge where it had seen just enough work to feel honest. His eyes said otherwise. Boss said gentle. Sutter panted, and that one word, boss, hung in the heat like a fly over meat. "Deputy," Kane said, voice flat as an anvil. "Take off the star." Sutter's jaw trembled. He didn't move. Kane tore it free himself and dropped it in the dust. The badge thudded light, the way a coin lands when it isn't worth what it claims. He turned the boy and slammed his arm up behind his back until Sutter hissed. In the crook of that pinned elbow, a knot of red cloth showed, thin, sweat-stained, a scarf's corner, Vale's color. "Paid in scraps?" Kane asked. or blood. Sutter's mouth worked. You can't hold this whole town alone. I made a way. A sound like a guilty child caught with a burned match lived in his voice. He promised no houses if he had the boy. A shot cracked from the livery roof. Chips of weathered board skipped along the alley like minnows. Kane hauled Sutter by the collar, half dragging him across dust, hot enough to sting through boot leather, and threw him against the gallows upright, where the cut rope lay coiled like a dead snake. He jerked shackles from his belt, the old iron cuffs scarred black from other wrists, and snapped them on Sutter's wrists with 2 hard bites of steel. "Folks," Kane called, not turning, voice cutting the square like wire. "Bucket line from the pump to the livery, now." Smith, head the line. Miss Finch, take the south side. Deputy Calder. Calder lurched from the jailhouse door, face bloodless, one arm hanging wrong from where Kane had popped the socket. Smoke ribboned from the rafters behind him. I was wrong," he said, eyes not finding the sheriff's, only the ground. "I tried to scare him off. Thought it'd buy us breath." "Then buy some now," Kane snapped. "Up that ladder, tear shingles, make a break." Calder nodded once and ran crooked, like a man teaching himself to move again. Mayor Ellsworth hovered at the courthouse threshold, ledger in hand, the canvas satchel Vale had tossed sitting at his heels like a pet with bad manners. "Sheriff," he pleaded, "for the love of all, just give the boy." Kane's steel-gray eyes drifted to the satchel. The tiny shoe lay half out, leather scuffed, blood dried to brown. He looked back at Sutter. "Whose shoe?" Sutter pushed his head against the post, eyes wet and bright. Small towns pay ugly when they don't listen. Kane lifted him by the front of his vest so the boy's boots left the boards. "Listen now," he said softly, and there was a piece of winter in it. "You're going to tell me what you've done, and you're going to say it without lying. Last chance to be a man." Sutter swallowed. Something hard and young broke in his face. "Powder," he blurted. "Mine powder. I set it in the crawl under the courthouse. Fuses run through the floor. 5th bell toll," and he licked his lips, watching Kane's eyes. "Boss says a blast makes a lesson. Says Gallows look better with the courthouse down." The bell rope twitched as if it had heard its cue. The 4th toll shuddered the air. Kane let go, and Sutter slid down the post to kneel in dust. "Where's your fuse?" the sheriff asked, already moving his eyes over the boards, measuring lengths the way a carpenter reads a room. In the black seam where the porch planks met the wall, a thin whisper of smoke curled like a writing snake. Sutter's gaze flicked there without meaning to. Kane saw. He lifted his Colt's barrel and pressed it to Sutter's temple. "You lit it?" Sutter nodded once. "Long run. Boss wanted spectacle." "Calder," Kane bellowed. "Get me a bucket and a bar. Miss Hallie, keep that boy under your nail. If you lose him, I lose this town." "Already have him?" Miss Hallie shot back. "And I bite harder than you, Sheriff. Do your work." Kane dropped to one knee, set the Colt between his teeth for a heartbeat, and levered the porch plank with his knife and a boot heel. Wood groaned. Tar smell breathed out, hot, sharp. Under the plank a thin rattan fuse sizzled along like a dry vein on fire, little white sparks leaping and dying. A line of it ran under the courthouse floor toward darkness. The snakeskin hiss rose and fell with the wind. He squashed the glowing inch under the knife's flat and felt heat bite his knuckles. The hiss went silent. He exhaled once. More sparks leaped farther down the line where it vanished into a bored hole. "Bar," He snapped. Calder stumbled in with a pry bar and a sloshing bucket. Kane took both in one motion, jammed the iron into the next plank, and heaved. Nails squealed. The board lifted, hot resin crying. More fuse. 2 lines now, split like a wishbone. He laid a fork, Kane said, half to himself. Good, smart, coward smart. Sutter's laugh came small and tight. 5th bell and there's fire under your feet, Sheriff. Kane doused the exposed lines. The water hissed and steamed. Fresh glow kindled further under, like winter coals waking. He set his jaw, hands moving by feel, lifting wood, drowning hiss, moving, drowning again. Each time he bought seconds, not safety. Out in the street, Vale's men fired in measured spite. Torches pitched toward roofs, buckets flew up in angry arcs, cussing thick as gnats stitched the air. Sally Finch planted herself like a fence post in the bucket line, chalk dust ghosting her sleeves, as if her schoolroom had followed her into battle. The smith's big arms pumped, pomp, shoulders slick with sweat. Miss Hallie's voice cut from the church like a whip. Keep that little fool's head down, or I'll switch the lot of you. Sheriff, Ellsworth squeaked, face slick. Pick man, fuse or boy, we can't. Kane's scar prickled. The part of him that was only law said, arrest Sutter, guard the jail, hold the line, let the courthouse burn if it must. The part that was justice, the part that had driven a knife through hemp and told a noose to go to hell, saw the crawl space north of the church. Owen's thin fingers white on the beam. A boy learning which men in this world had earned the right to be called father. He looked at Sutter. Who are you to him? Sutter blinked, surprised by the question. Tears made mud tracks in the dust on his cheek. To Vale? He echoed, then shook his head, bitter humor warring with hurt. His blood and not his son. The words landed raw. Kane heard a boy's boots on a bare kitchen floor, memory that never stopped walking in his skull. He laid the bar under another plank. The 5th toll started to fall, deeper, older, a sound like the earth learning a new word. Sutter's face softened for a heartbeat, the way faces do when truth gets loose. You can't save them both, he whispered. He said that's the lesson. Kane met his eyes. Maybe he's a poor teacher. He dropped the bar and ran. He went at a dead sprint through the gallows shadow, down the back steps, across the alley where heat rose off the dust, in the visible shiver of a blacksmith's quench. Flames licked the livery's edge. A horse screamed, high and awful, and Calder, one-armed and stubborn, cut a halter and slapped the animal toward open street. The animal's flanks gleamed like spilled oil, and his eyes rolled white in terror. But he ran, and there was small mercy in that. Kane tore for the church crawl, lungs scalding. The bell's 5th note finished falling, and for a breath, the square held its breath with it. Owen's pale face showed in the crack between boards, pinned eyes huge. Sheriff, out, Kane said, crouching, hand extended. Now. The boy wriggled. Hallie hooked his belt and shoved from behind. Kane caught Owen's wrist and hauled him free, the small arm hot and shaking under his palm. Smoke clawed at their throats. Somewhere behind them a woman sobbed that had never sobbed in public in her life. From the gallows, Sutter's voice rose in a broken yell. Kane, the fork. He laid it under the courthouse breathed in. The world blew outward. A bass thump punched the square like God's fist. Floorboards of the courthouse lifted and slapped back down. Windows shattered in an instant glitter storm. The gallows beam kicked and groaned, as if an old tree had remembered wind. A geyser of dust and splinters leapt to the height of the church eaves, hung there bright in sunlight, and rained down in a dry hiss. People hit the ground. Torches guttered out and flared again. The bell rope jerked wild, 2, 3 mad little jerks, and the clapper inside beat the iron like a heart that had lost count. Kane took the blast on his back, curled around the boy, hat gone. The air around them was full of falling paper, the ledger's pages blown free, names tumbling like leaves in a fire season. His badge, knocked from his pocket in the shock, spun slow on the boards beside his cheek, bright, then dark, then bright, until it fell and lay there, showing him a warped man he barely recognized. He rolled, ears ringing, eyes burning. The courthouse front had bulged and sagged, the porch tilted, the doorway ragged with splintered jams. Fire rippled under the boards, finding pitch, learning a faster language. Vale's riders whooped like boys on a dare. Sutter still knelt where Kane had chained him, face cut with flying glass. He stared at the breathing porch as if it could speak back. He set a second fork, he said, voice soft with shock or revelation. His eyes climbed to the church roof, then to the jailhouse where smoke pried at the windows like fingers, then to the gallows. Its beam cracked, its post listing toward the square, as if tired of standing upright for other men's mistakes. Jeremiah Vale, collar wilted, red scarf bright, put his boot on the bottom step again. Deliver, he called over the ringing in everyone's heads, or the next lesson takes names. Kane rose with the boy still against him, dust and glass in his hair, mouth tasting lime and copper. His hand found the Colt by touch. He set Owen behind his legs without looking, like a man sets his last coin under a stone. The gallows post gave a long, warning creak. Above the wrecked courthouse, a shadow crossed the sun, rider on the ridge, flagging a signal with a strip of cloth stamped with letters, Fort C. N. Kane's eyes narrowed into the bright. Was it Klein? Crane? Canyon? The cloth fluttered like a promise or a lie. Behind him, something tore with the sound canvas makes when it finally surrenders. The gallows beam began to fall. Midnight pressed against the jailhouse like a wet saddle blanket. Heat still bled from the adobe walls, and Sheriff Kane felt it through his palm where he braced the window shutter. The street beyond was gunmetal dark, moon snagged in slow-moving cloud. Somewhere a horse stamped to and blew steam. His silver badge turned between his fingers, slow, deliberate, catching lamplight in thin knifed flashes. Eli slept on the cot in the holding cell, small body curled around the wool blanket, breath whistling through dust-clogged nostrils. The boy's father had finally come, Boone Laramie, with rifles and lanterns and a road's worth of hate. Kane slid the shutter wider. Shapes pooled along storefronts, men with the patience of wolves. On the porch of the closed mercantile, a bull-shouldered figure tipped his hat back and cupped his hands around his mouth. Kane. Boone's voice rolled down Maine like thunder off canyon walls. You got my boy behind your iron. You open that door and put him in my arms, and we ride out without smoking half your town. Deputy Pike flinched in the corner, hat in his hands, sweat running through ash-dry stubble. His eyes wouldn't stay on Kane for more than a heartbeat. The betrayal from Part 5 still lay between them like a coiled snake. Maps traced in whiskey, a back door keyed twice. Boone tipped about guard shifts. Kane had caught him before the latch turned. Now the deputy sat cuffed to his own chair, shame chewing his jaw. Kane spoke without turning. You'll have your say in front of a judge, Boone, same as any man. Judge? Boone barked a laugh. Torches lifted, painting the air in jaundiced light. Ain't no court west of the Pecos that'll weigh a father's blood against a lawman's pride. Send him out. Eli stirred, the word father moving under his skin like a fever. Nita, the Apache girl who'd been keeping watch over him, rose from her stool by the cell and laid 2 brown fingers against the boy's shoulder. Sleep, she whispered, voice the sound of wind through cottonwoods. Dream the horses are gentle. Kane holstered the window latch. He crossed the room and checked the hinges on the back door, checked the bar on the side sally, checked the thin braid of fuse he'd rigged along the floorboard to a keg of wet sand and nails, more noise than iron, enough to make a man rethink his next step. He moved like he always did when talk broke into danger, calm around the edges, storm in the core. He could feel the rope of the gallows 2 blocks away, as if it lay coiled at his feet. Timbers newly raised by townsfolk who wanted quick endings. Symbols matter. The badge was law. The gallows called itself justice. Sometimes both were lies. "Sheriff," Pike said hoarsely, "Boone don't bluff. He'll burn us out." "You set the kindling," Kane said, mild as a winter sky. He knelt near Pike, close enough to read the panic strobing in the man's pupils. "Why?" Pike swallowed. "Hollis," he rasped. "Mayor told me do it. Said Laramie's boys would take their wrath with them if they got the kid back. Said the town lives if the jail falls." Kane's face didn't change, but something in his eyes cooled another few degrees. "And the boy?" Pike couldn't hold his gaze. "Collateral. Law ain't always justice," Kane murmured, almost to himself. He rose, the badge whispering in his palm. "But justice rides with me." He stepped to the bars. Eli's eyes were open now, blue and raw. "You said my pa was a thief," the boy said, voice edged with sleep and dread. "You said he killed men." "I said your pa made choices," Kane answered. "Some can be unmade, some can't." Outside, Boone called again, softer but deadlier. "Kane, I ain't asking twice." Kane lifted the cell key, let it hang from his finger, let the iron sing a little. Nita's eyes flicked to him, skeptical, fierce. "If you open that door," she said, "they swallow us whole. I'm not opening it." Kane tucked the key away and took the Colt from his hip, thumb tracing the pearl grip as if touching a memory. Then he set it on the desk, where Eli could see, where Nita could, too. "I'm setting the terms." He stepped onto the front stoop, Duster breathing in the night's faint wind. The boards creaked. Torches canted his shadow tall against the sign that read jail in flaked black paint. Boone and his men shifted, rifles clocking up as one. Kane pitched his voice so it carried to the last man squatting behind the far hitching post. "You come in numbers," he called. "Doesn't make you right. You want the boy, Boone. You walk to this porch alone and leave your guns at the steps. We speak where God and everyone can hear." Laughter rippled, but Boone held up a hand, and the sound died. He studied Kane the way a wolf studies an iron trap, as if measuring not the jaws but the mind that set them. "Reckon you think I'll trade my pride?" "I reckon you love your son," Kane said. Boone spat. He looked left, right, at men whose eyes were on him, seeking permission they pretended they didn't need. Then he huffed once and strode forward, boots scuffing dust, rifle left behind on a barrel. He stopped at the bottom step. The torches behind him guttered, smoke feeding the stars. "Bring him out," Boone said, voice roughening at the edges. The swagger rubbed thinner close to the boy's scent. "You see the gallows?" Kane tilted his chin toward the dark scaffold rising over rooftops, its ropes swaying like a slow pendulum. "That's the road you're on. I take you in. There's trial. Maybe mercy, maybe not. But the boy doesn't grow up knowing his father met the world with fire and left him ashes." Boone's jaw flexed. "Don't you preach me." "Then listen," Kane said, stepping down one tread, his coat brushing plank. "Lay down this war. Walk inside in irons. See your son proper come morning. Give him more than smoke and gunfire to remember." From the gloom, a bottle broke against the dirt, and someone hissed, "He's bindin' you, Boone. He'll hang you at dawn." Kane didn't look away from Boone. "I won't. Not at dawn. You'll get your say." Then a blade edge of steel entered his voice. "But if you fire on this door, understand me. I will cut your gang in half and stack the living on the dead." Silence fell heavy. A horse blew. Somewhere far off an owl called, and the sound seemed like judgment. Inside, a floorboard whispered. Nita moved to the side window, eyes black as a new moon, her knife trapped in the lamplight like a thought made visible. Eli stood now, small fingers wrapped around the bars, the jail's iron cool under his cheek. Boone's shoulders dropped a fraction. "Let me hear him," he said, and there it was, the crack in the mountain, the man beneath the legend. Kane nodded once and went inside. He lifted Eli onto his hip and returned to the door. The men outside leaned forward in a single animal motion, torches smearing flame across their faces. Boone reached the second step, both hands raised as if supplicating to his own past. "Pa?" Eli breathed. Boone took that syllable like a bullet and smiled like a bruise. "Son." Something moved quick as a rattler in Kane's peripheral vision. A muzzle winked from the livery roof line, long and lean. Not one of Boone's boys. Wrong hat, wrong stillness. Kane's mind flashed through names. Mayor Hollis? No, Hollis didn't climb ladders. The outline shifted, and the lamp's eye caught a brass badge, pinned crooked to a coat. Territorial Inspector. Authority from the Capitol. A man who didn't want Boone Laramie testifying about who bought, what and where the blood money slept. Kane. Nita whispered behind his shoulder, reading the same picture. Irreversible choices, always in the thin breath before dawn. Kane's right hand drifted to the Colt on his desk, not there anymore. Eli had edged his fingers through the bars toward it without touching, as if wanting to feel a father's weight the pistol could not give. "Boone," Kane said, never taking his eyes off the roofline. "Tell your men to douse the torches, now." "Why?" "Because hell looks better in the dark." Boone turned, ready to bark, when the first shot cracked. Sparks leapt from the porch post. Kane dragged Eli sideways, the boy's cry a raw tear through the night. Boone stumbled against the rail, swore, dove for cover, his men exploding into chaos, firing at shadows that weren't theirs. Glass shattered. The back door bucked. Another push from the alley, a second team trying the hinge. Pike lurched to his feet, cuff chain clanging, panic and shame warring in his face. "Sheriff!" Kane yanked the fuse, fire skittering like a snake along the floorboard. The keg coughed, and the alley filled with screaming nails and louder fear. He thrust Eli into Nita's arms. "Cellar, west crawl. Go." Boone crawled up the steps in the smoke, coughing, hands empty. He thrust his wrists toward Kane, eyes burning with something like surrender and something like hope. "Put me in irons. Save my boy." Kane reached for the cuffs. A second rifle barked from the roof. Deputy Pike jerked, as if yanked by the spine, the chain between his wrists ringing once, clear as a bell, then falling silent. Blood darkened the floorboards, spattering Kane's boot tops. Outside, the inspector's voice cut through the gun haze, sharp as a judge's gavel. No survivors in that jail. The gallows roped down the street swung in the wind and creaked like a door opening onto the future. Kane snapped the irons around Boone's wrists with a click that felt like a verdict and lifted his head into the gun smoke, eyes gone to steel. Dawn came thin as old paper, a graying light that seeped through smoke and dust and the bitter breath of men. The abandoned courthouse crouched at the edge of town like a dead thing, its windows black, its roofline broken by years of wind. The gallows out front, 2 uprights and a creaking crossbeam, complained softly as the breeze worried the rope. Sheriff Kane stood with his hat low against the glare and the chill, turning his silver badge once, twice, between bruised fingers before pinning it back to his dust-worn duster. The boy, Eli, clung to the jailhouse step behind him, wrapped in a blanket too big for his bones. He watched everything with the hollow intensity of those who'd seen too much. When the father, Judd Hale, shuffled into view in iron shackles, boots dragging, Eli made a sound that wasn't quite a word and not yet a cry. Steel-gray eyes flicked from Kane to the boy and back again. Kane didn't look away. The town had gathered in a wary crescent, miners with split knuckles, a seamstress with torn cuticles, a rancher whose hands shook when the wind changed. Judge Avery had come down in his traveling coat, breath fogging, a paper decree trembling between gloved fingers. Behind the people, scattered along rooftops and shadows, the riders, Hale's men, glittered like broken glass in morning light. Bandanas hid their cheeks, carbines hid their intentions. Every rooftop winked with metal, and somewhere beyond the livery, a horse snorted like it knew the smell of powder and fear. Kane walked Hale from the jail to the courthouse steps. The clink of chain against chain sounded like a clock in a sick room. When they reached the gallows, a gust tugged the noose so it swung slow as a pendulum over Hale's shoulder. "Sheriff," Judge Avery said, voice thin and authoritative by habit, "under territorial statute, summary execution is permitted following armed insurrection. Sign here as arresting officer." The pen quivered against the page. Kane didn't take it. He looked past the judge, past the murmuring faces, past the rope, to the boy. Eli's hands pressed the wool to his mouth. You could see the blue veins at his temples. You could see what it cost him to stand there. Hale's laugh came out hoarse. "Hang me, Kane. See what rides down out of that ridge when the stool kicks." He tilted his head at the line of low hills beyond the smelter works. "I got a boy who needs me." "You got a boy who needs peace," Kane said. His voice was low enough that Eli might not hear the tremor in it. From the crowd, a hiss. Somebody spat in the dirt. Somebody else muttered a prayer through cracked lips. A shape slipped from the jail's shadow. Deputy Barton, coat dark with blood at the ribs, eyes fever bright. He leaned on the porch post, beckoned Kane with a knuckle. Kane stepped close without turning his back on Hale. "Fuse under the water tower," Barton breathed, words rusting in his throat. Hale's second, knife hand drew, set it while we fought. 10 sticks. They'll blow if you hang him. They'll drown the street, take the bank, the school, the boy. His mouth worked. "I was the one let them through the North Arroyo. Thought it'd scare you off the gold shipment. Not this." He swallowed glass. "I'm sorry, Sheriff." The wind shifted. Kane smelled wet plank and hemp and old, dried blood. A meadowlark tried a note and gave it up. Judge Avery cleared his throat. "Sheriff?" Kane stepped up to the platform. He lifted the noose until the knot brushed his knuckles, then let the rope swing again. He spoke without raising his voice, words carrying because the town was quiet enough to hear a pin kill a fly. "Law says I hang this man now." He watched Hale, but he was speaking to all of them. "Justice says I keep you alive doing it." Hale smirked, but there was sweat in his beard. "Make your choice, Lawman." Kane's badge spun once under his thumb. Then it stopped. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." He turned, took the pen from the judge, and snapped it in half. A murmur rippled like grass in a gust. Avery's eyes flared. His decree trembled. Kane faced the rooftops, the alleys, the shallow breaths in every shadow. He lifted his Colt and held it skyward, so the morning washed white along the pearl handle. "Drew," he called, iron steady. "If that fuse burns, your boss dies slow with a rope, and you die faster with a bullet you'll never hear. You wanted a war? Here I am." Silence. Even the rope stopped moving. Somewhere, leather creaked. "Bring me the coil and cut the wire," Kane went on, "and I give you my word. Your men who drop their irons walk out alive, tried in a court with a roof that hasn't fallen in." A laugh came brittle from a roof edge. "Your word is a badge, pinned to your own chest." The voice was rasp and gravel. Knife hand drew. Kane holstered the Colt, slow. Then he unpinned the badge, held it in his fist. He looked at Eli. The boy looked back like he could see straight through whatever meager armor Kane still had. "Badge buys law," Kane said, "but I'm paying for justice." He dropped the star. It hit the platform plank with the small absolute sound of a wedding band on a coffin lid. Gasps dragged air from the crowd. Judge Avery's decree fluttered in his hand like a bird that didn't know it was already dead. Kane stepped behind Hale, drew a blade, and sawed through the shackle's leather thong at the wrists, just enough give that a man might lift his hands fast if he thought he saw a miracle coming. Hale stiffened, confusion carving a line across his face. "Sheriff?" the judge croaked. Kane didn't look back. "Judd Hale, hear it clear." He pushed the man forward beneath the noose but didn't set it. "You get one chance. You call your men off and tell Drew to bring me that fuse, or you reach for a gun that isn't there, and I end you right here, under a beam older than your lies. Either way, the boy watches what kind of man his father is." Hale's pupils blew wide. Beyond the livery, a hawk cut a lazy circle. On the ridge, riders shifted, impatient with the slow arithmetic of death and mercy. Hale lifted his chin. His mouth worked like he was trying to spit and couldn't find enough water in him to do it. He looked at Eli, the boy's blanket that had slipped from one shoulder. Morning put a white edge on his collarbone. "Pa," Eli said, voice like wind in a bottle. The first word since midnight. That broke something in Hale that bullets had not. He blinked hard, then barked a sound that started as a laugh and finished as a sob. "Drew," he roared to the roofs. "Stand down, damn you. Pull that wire and toss it where the sheriff can see it. We go to court. We live like men or hang like dogs." Knots of black cloth and hat brims shifted. A figure rose from behind the water tower, knife on his hip, a coil of fuse in one hand, then tossed the tarred rope so it slithered across the street like a dead snake. He raised empty palms. Carbines clattered to boards. Rooftop shadows shed their iron like molting cicadas. In ones and twos, The riders stepped into the light with their hands high. A long breath left the town. Someone started to cry. Someone laughed a single hysterical note and clapped both hands over their mouth. The gallows rope stirred again as if disappointed. Judge Avery rallied with the righteous fury of a man who had almost been dragged into history by his collar. "This is highly irregular," he sputtered. "Tell it to your Bible," Kane said, tired. "We'll use the courthouse ledger instead." He flicked his blade, and the last thong fell. Hale stared at his freed hands like they didn't belong to him. Then he looked at Eli again. "You'll see me in irons with a lawyer at my left and a preacher at my right," Hale said roughly, as if rehearsing a sentence he wasn't sure he could finish. "I ain't promising more than that." "You just did," Kane said. They walked Hale not to the rope, but through the courthouse door, into dust that smelled of disuse and old arguments. Inside, a cracked portrait of a governor leaned crooked, and a sunbeam lit floating grit like tiny souls. Barton limped in behind with a rifle at low ready. Drew brought the fuse coil and set it on the clerk's desk, the way a man presents a piece of himself for weighing. On the far wall, a set of iron shackles hung like punctuation. Kane took them down. They were cold with night and memory. He fastened them to Hale's wrists, this time for the journey the law should have demanded at first. As he closed the iron, something like relief passed over Hale's face, thin as a shadow bird. He looked once more for the boy. Eli had followed as far as the threshold. Kane nodded at him. "Wait outside, son." "Will you keep him alive?" Eli asked, voice unthreaded. Kane's hand thumped the iron bar into place. The echo rolled through the empty courthouse and out into a town that would never hear the same silence again. "I'll keep everybody alive I can." Outside, wind ran dry fingers along the gallows beam. The badge lay on the platform, catching a wedge of sun. Kane picked it up and felt the grit scratch his thumb. He didn't pin it, not yet. He just held it while the town remembered how to breathe. Across the street, the water tower dripped one silver drop, then another, like a clock starting over. The creak of rope went still, and somewhere far off, thunder muttered like an old judge promising rain. The courthouse doors yawned on their broken hinges as the morning climbed toward heat. People drifted away the way people always do after a near death. Quiet, careful, looking down, grateful to still have boot soles. The riders were herded into cells with their hands visible through bars. The fuse coil sat on the clerk's desk like a surrendered lie. Kane stood alone on the steps for a time, his hat brim cutting the sun in half, the badge resting in his palm where the metal had warmed to skin. Behind him, a boy's breathing evened as he slept at last on a bench that once knew verdicts. In front of him, the street held the marks of last night's fight. A churn of hoof, a dead cigar, a single copper case catching light at the gutter. He weighed the star, what it had done, and what it might still wreck. When he finally pinned it back to his coat, he did it with the care of a man resetting a broken bone that would never be perfect again. The town would have its trial. The gallows would keep its appetite one day more. And Sheriff Kane, who had let the rope rest and chosen the chain, didn't flinch when the wind moved and the badge tapped once against his heart. In the gray hours before the sun took its full bite, Kane felt the badge as a question instead of an answer. Law had given him the rope, easy and swift, and the crowd had been hungry enough to swallow it. But the fuse under the tower wasn't just explosive. It was the shape of justice, when it's blind in the wrong direction. He'd seen that shape before in a burned doorway, a child's shoes under the ash. It was why his hand had shaken when the judge held out ink and a noose. When he dropped the star, he wasn't resigning. He was reminding himself who picked it up the first time, and why. He forced a father to choose in front of his son, then bound that father not with hemp but with consequence. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't vengeance. It was the narrow plank between them. The town would learn that justice breathes only if someone keeps counting the living. He'd carry the counting in his sleep. Later, when the courthouse stilled and the boy's breathing steadied, Kane fastened the badge back on. It felt heavier. Maybe it always had been. Savior or executioner, the wind would decide how his story settled in the dust. But the choice had been his, and at last, it had been right.